With any collection, there's a danger that at some point you're going to find yourself just one step away from being on the next episode of Hoarders, especially if your nearest and dearest don't really share your enthusiasm, your passion, or even your obsession with vintage sewing machines, sewing books, sewing patterns, or whatever it happens to be that you collect. I'm often faced with that quizzical look from family and friends when they find out that I've usually got more than one copy of the same item. Now, I have got a very good reason for doing that, and it's not insanity. It's the fact that usually these items, even though they look completely similar, have got something that's different. This is SimplyStitchy 4935, and as you can see, both copies look practically identical. But there are some significant and telling differences on these two patterns that allow me to know that one was made for the UK market and one was made for the US market. The first clue that tells me that these two patterns were made for different parts of the world is here. This is a stamp that would have been put on the packet by the shop that was selling it. And as you can see there, I hope it's coming up clearly on the camera, is it says Belfast. Another clue is slightly further up the envelope, and it's right here. That weird looking fraction isn't 3/6 or 3/6. It is in fact 3 and 6, 3 shillings and sixpence. And that 3 and 6 is how the UK used to show prices back in the days of pre-decimalisation. If we take a look at this pattern, the price is in cents, and just underneath it it says in Canada, and it's got a different price. It's 60 cents instead of 50 cents. Now that tells me that this pattern was made for the North American market, the US and Canada, and this one was made for the UK. Those aren't the only differences between these patterns. There are some aesthetic differences between them too. If you take a look at this copy, this is the US copy. The envelope is a slightly yellower or creamier colour, and the artwork is subtle. The outline isn't quite as sharp, whereas on this one, the UK copy, the outlines are more defined and the envelope itself is a slightly whiter shade. The back of the pattern is quite interesting as well, particularly in this flap area. On the US copy, across the back of the flap it says ask for the SimplyStitchy pattern book. There you go. So it's encouraging you to not just buy this pattern, but to go and find other patterns that you might like. Whereas on the UK pattern, they're more interested in you actually making this pattern, because they just tell you to use SimplyStitchy tracing paper for professional results. You've also got in the top right hand corner of the back of the envelope, it'll actually tell you where the pattern was printed. It says it was printed in the USA on this one. For this one, it doesn't just tell you that this particular pattern was printed in the UK, or it says Great Britain there. It also goes on to tell you where it was printed in Australia and New Zealand, which kind of suggests that this pattern was made for the Australian and New Zealand markets as well as the UK. Now obviously that's just me making an educated guess, but if any of you out there have got a copy of SimplyStitchy 4935 from either Australia or New Zealand, let me know in the comments, because I would love to know if there are even more differences between those patterns and the ones that I've got here. Taking the patterns out of the envelopes gives us more differences between the two. This is the US market copy and this is the UK version. And as you can see, the instructions are a slightly different shade. This is like a beige colour, whereas this one is slightly more of a creamy yellow colour. Now obviously part of that could have more to do with how the different patterns have aged. But if we hold on to the instructions, you'll find that there's a slight difference in the quality of the paper. This one's a little bit thicker and that one's quite thin really. And although the actual layout and the information that's on both copies of the instructions is identical, if we take a look at the bottom of the instruction sheet, you'll find that the American copy has instructions on how to use various different sewing tools, whereas the British copy has an advert for a zip. The good news is that whatever side of the Atlantic you happen to pick up either copy, you'll find that the instructions are identical. They've got the same steps. The construction's carried out in the same order throughout. The one thing that I have noticed with this particular SimplyStitchy pattern is that although SimplyStitchy in the 1950s were putting the date of the actual pattern on the instructions down in this this bottom corner, all it says on these patterns is this one was printed in Great Britain and this one is printed in the USA. There's no actual date to be able to determine if my assumption that this is a 1960s pattern is correct or not. But the simple fact that this pattern doesn't give you a date is actually a really good way of dating the pattern. More on that in a minute. The actual pattern pieces, this is the US copy, and it's your usual tissue paper, pretty similar to the stuff that you'll find in patterns today. It's decent quality, and obviously it's printed because this is the 60s. The UK pattern, on the other hand, is not as dark. It's more of a whitish colour, whereas this is what I'd call beige. And it's got a waxy finish to it, and it's a lot thinner than the tissue paper in the American copy, and that is really evident when it comes to the transfers. This particular pattern, if we have a look at this view here, you can put a monogram or a set of initials down the front of that particular top, and the different letters for the initials are included in the pattern. This is the UK and this one is the US, and you'll see the one from the US has faded quite significantly. Now that could be down to the ink that was used to print the pattern, or it could be down to the fact that this UK copy has that waxy finish, and that might have protected the transfers just that little bit more from age damage. In both cases, this is a one size only pattern. The US is size 12, a bust 32, and this is size 14, bust 34. And these are pre-1967 sizes, so this size 12 and this size 14 are smaller than what we'd expect those sizes to be today. It wasn't until the 1980s that patterns started to be produced in multi-sizes. And you'll find with a lot of these single sized patterns, the pieces are already cut out, so they actually come pre-cut like that in a lot of cases. And that is true on both of these patterns, and both of these patterns, interestingly enough, if we take a look at this piece in particular, have been cut out and used, which means this pattern was made on both sides of the Atlantic, and it looks as though it was a popular pattern. One of the interesting things about both of these patterns is the information that's on the back, because apart from the printing information here, they're exactly the same. This is the US pattern and this is the UK pattern, and you'll notice from both, particularly with these rulers that go across the top of the pattern, they're both in inches. You remember that I said earlier in the video that this pattern dates to the 1960s. Well, it's actually an early 1960s pattern. Now there's no date on the envelope, there's no date on the instructions on the inside, so you're probably wondering how I know that. The thing is, there is information on both these patterns that can help you date the pattern to within a couple of years or so. And there's also acquired knowledge. The more you get into contact with vintage or antique items, the more you're going to be able to put your own knowledge into the mix to help you identify how old a pattern is. And I'm going to show you how you can do that. The first thing is, as I've said, neither of these envelopes, all the instructions on the inside actually have a date printed on them. Before the early 1960s, SimplyStitchy was putting the date on the second page of the instructions, by where it says printed in the USA on this one. There is a time frame within the 60s, the early 60s in particular, where SimplyStitchy didn't put the date on patterns anywhere at all. And then they went back to putting the date on the patterns later on in that decade. So that tells me that this pattern is likely to be from the start of the 60s. Another clue is this 3 and 6. This stopped being a thing in 1971 when the UK started using decimals. So that tells me that this pattern predates 1971. If we take a look at the price on the US pattern, it says 50 cents. If we compare that to this pattern, this is SimplyStitchy 1116, and if we take a look at the instructions, in that bottom corner it says 1955. So we know that patterns in 1955 were priced at 50 cents. Which means that this pattern has to be fairly close to the end of the 50s for it to be the same price. It's also interesting to note that there's a slight difference in the style of the information that's down the side of the envelope. We're moving away from the 1950s style, and this new, slightly less cursive SimplyStitchy is coming through into the early 1960s. And as you get further into the 60s, this will change yet again, and the price will increase even further to 60 cents. I think it goes up to 65. But there is one more thing about this pattern in particular that helps me date it to the early 60s rather than the late 60s, and that's on the back of this UK pattern. You remember I said that both this and the US pattern show the measurements in inches. The UK officially started to transfer over to the metric system from around 1965, which means that patterns predating that period were more likely to be in inches and less likely to have inches on one side and metric on the other. So using all the information that I've been able to glean from not just these pattern envelopes but from pattern envelopes of other patterns in my collection, I'm going to hazard a guess and say that this particular pattern dates back to around about 1962, 1963, and that's about the closest that I can get it using the information that I've got available to me at the moment. I mean, the other thing that we could consider is the hair on that particular illustration there. That looks very Jackie Kennedy-esque, so I reckon 62, 63 is going to be about right. I hope you liked today's video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Why not consider subscribing and clicking that little notification bell just below so that YouTube can let you know when I upload another video. You can even support the channel by donating through the Super Thanks button, which is that little heart with the S in it. And why not go and check out some of the other videos that I've got on this channel using the links coming up on the screen any minute now, or the ones I'll put in the description box below for you. Whatever video you go and check out next, I hope to see you back here for the next one. And in the meantime, whatever you're sewing it with, embrace your creativity and have fun. Thank you ever so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.